Go ahead. Go ahead. Answer. Sure, you go ahead.
Okay.
Come here. Come here.
One of the things that this crisis has taught us, sir, is that we are dangerously over-dependent on a global supply chain. For our medicines, like penicillin, our medical supplies, like masks, and our medical equipment, like ventilators. We have right now, as we speak, over 50 countries have already imposed some forms of export restrictions in their country against the rest of the world. And what we're learning from that is that no matter how many treaties you have, no matter how many alliances, no matter how many phone calls, when push comes to shove, you run the risk as a nation of not having what you need. And if there's any vindication of the president's Buy American, secure borders, and a strong manufacturing base philosophy, strategy, and belief, it is this crisis, because it underscores everything that we see there. So the Buy American order, which is going through process, would do a couple things. It would simply say, not during this crisis, because we don't want to disrupt anything. I want to be really clear about that. But going forward, after this is over, the VA, DOD, HHS, and this government buys American for essential medicines, our medical countermeasures, and the medical supplies and equipment we need. At the same time, it will deregulate so we can get the FDA and EPA to facilitate domestic manufacturing, and then innovate. Because the key here is having advanced manufacturing on U.S. soil that can leapfrog other countries so we don't have to worry about competing against cheap sweatshop labor, lax environmental regulations, different tax regimes, and the massive subsidies of foreign governments who are actually directly attacking our industrial base. So be patient with that, sir. The other priorities we have right now are the DPA and what the task force is doing. But if we learn anything from this crisis, it should be never again should we have to depend on the rest of the world for our essential medicines and countermeasures.
And by the way, we've cut them out also, to be honest. We've stopped orders going from certain places. And in a couple of places, like we had a big order going to Italy on important outfits and some ventilators, and it was going to Italy. They made the order a long time ago. And I said, you got to let it go. They had an order, and I could have cut it. Under the act, I could have cut it. I said, nope, you can't do that. You got to let it go. You know, they have big problems. We had an order going to Spain, and I said, let it go. I could have stopped it. I said, let it go. We're going to be fine. I said, let it go. So it works that way also. One other thing as to your question, oftentimes, and we've told this to the governors, Mike, we've been very strong on this, if you think there's bidding between federal government and state, let us know and we'll drop out immediately. Or you drop out and we lower the price.
Against each other.
No. If we're bidding against each other, I said find out who it is. And usually they know. Everyone knows. And we're notified, and we get notified, and we'll either drop out or they'll drop out. But we have another problem. There are 151 countries out there beyond the states. There are 151 countries that have this problem. And they're ordering too. It's really a mess. Now, in a little while, the hardest thing to get are the ventilators because they're, it takes a while to build them. And we have thousands of them being built right now. In a little while, they'll be worth about $5. But right now, they're very valuable. And we're going to have a lot of them being shipped. In fact, that's why General Motors called up before Mary. That's why others called up. 2 days ago, they called up that they're all in production. And they're starting to arrive in a week and a half. But there'll be a time when we're going to build stockpiles. By the way, the states should have been building their stockpile. We have almost 10,000 in our stockpile, and we've been building it, and we've been supplying it. But the states should be building. We're a backup. We're not an ordering clerk. We're a backup. And we've done an unbelievable job. Like, for instance, whoever heard of a governor calling up, sir, can you build us a hospital of 2,500 rooms? And we built it. Can you build us 4 medical centers? We built it. Can you deliver a hospital ship with 1,000 rooms? And we did it. And we did it in Los Angeles, too. We've been we've done an unbelievable job. These people, and thousands of people behind them, but we're a backup. Ideally, those hospitals would have had all this equipment. Ideally, those states should have had all this equipment, and I think they will the next time. You know, you heard the case where thousands of ventilators could have been had at a very inexpensive price 3 years ago, and a certain state decided not to exercise that right because they wanted to build a road or they wanted to build something else because it's big money. You're talking about, I think it was $1 billion, but you're talking about a lot of money for something that may never happen. Because normally on a ventilator, other than a pandemic or an epidemic, you wouldn't need anything like this. Hospitals have 3 ventilators, big hospitals, and they get by with it. And now they want thousands. I mean, they want thousands of ventilators. You call up a governor and they'll say, "Sir, could you send us 40,000 ventilators?" Nobody has ever heard of a thing like this. So they've done some job. Let me just tell you, when Secretary Mnuchin spoke, they want you to call not .com, but SBA.gov, okay, for the application and for information. Okay, so it's SBA, small business, SBA.gov, okay, if you don't mind. Yeah, let's go, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. President. I want to follow up from a question yesterday regarding your administration's denial of the expansion of Obamacare's special enrollment period in the wake of this pandemic. In your own words, VP Pence gave a 5-minute non-answer, but people facing this pandemic illness and even worse, most experts say that having health care is critical to our nation's health and financial well-being. Can you assure Americans tonight that you will reopen Obamacare marketplace so that they can be covered in this time of combined health
we're doing
and
better than that.
financial
Yeah,
crisis?
no, I understand the question, and we're doing better than that. We're going to try and get a cash payment to the people, and we're working out the mechanics of that with legislature. So we're going to try and get them a cash payment because just opening it up doesn't help as much. So we're going to work it out. So we're going to try and get for that certain group of people, it's a certain group of people, a cash payment. Go ahead.
I really want to ask you about masks, but I also just wanted to follow up on a couple of hanging threads there. Just the question earlier about the bidding. What happens, though, when states are bidding against each other on those markets?
Well, they have that, and they have to work that out. What they should do is they should have, long before this pandemic arrived, they should have been on the open market just buying. There was no competition. You could have made a great price. The states have to stock up. It's like one of those things. They waited. They didn't want to spend the money because they thought this would never happen. And their shelves, in some cases, were bare. And by the way, in some cases, they weren't. They were beautifully serviced. They did a good job. But in some cases, their shelves were bare. So the best thing they can do is when times become normalized, and they will, hopefully soon. And actually, you're going to have a lot of excess material because so much is being done right now in terms of protective gear, protective outfits. A lot's being done. It's going to be, within 6 months, it's going to be sold for the right price. They got to stack up for the next time. But we are doing that, and the Admiral has done a fantastic job. Senator Schumer wrote a letter today, and he says, you should put a military man in charge. I said, well, Chuck, if you knew a little bit more, we have one of the most highly respected people in the military, the Admiral. This is what he does, too, very professionally, and he's in charge. But Chuck didn't know that. Okay, Jeff first.
Mr. President, you tweeted this morning about your call with Saudi Arabia's MBS. We've had some people say that the figures that you cited between 10 million and 15 million barrels per day is not what they're agreeing to. Can you be more specific about what?
I don't know what they're agreeing to. I think they might agree to more than that. Look, Russia.
Did he tell you that, sir?
Russia, yeah, he did say that actually. Russia talked about 10 million barrels. Russia and Saudi Arabia are fighting over this, and as everybody knows, it's really killing an industry, hurting Russia badly, hurting Saudi Arabia badly. I said, this is an easy one. It should be an easy one. And it may be 10, and it may be more than that. I was actually told it may be 10, as I told somebody before. It may be 10, and it may be more than that. Maybe it's 15. Maybe it goes up to 15. Could be as high as 15. And, there's a tremendous oversupply right now. That industry was oversupplied before the virus. And when the virus came along, they lost 35, 40% of the world. And there's an unbelievable, you can't get a ship now. Every ship is loaded to the gills, sitting out someplace in the ocean. They're storage tanks. They're not even ships, they're storage tanks. So it would be great for Russia. It would be great for Saudi Arabia. I hope they make that deal, but that's what they told me. They said well, I think it'll be hopefully soon. I think hopefully they'll announce something soon. Now, can a deal be broken? Can something happen where it doesn't happen? I guess. In which case there's another alternative. But I'd rather not see that other alternative. I hope they can make a deal. I think they both want to make a deal. And they're both smart. They love their countries. They want to make a deal. It's good, but it's also good for the world if they do, because you save an industry. Yeah, please. Go ahead. Go ahead, in the back.
What do you mean by cash payments?
I'm going to let Mike, because we went over this very specifically, and I'll let you talk about it, Mike, because you responded last time.
Right. Thank you, Mr. President. As I said yesterday, the President's put a priority on ensuring that no American has to worry about the cost of coronavirus testing, and we've been working every day to make sure that Americans don't have to worry about the cost of treatment. And at this point, the White House Coronavirus Task Force is working on a proposal for the President to use some of the $100 billion that we're making available to hospitals to compensate the hospitals directly for any coronavirus treatment that they provide to uninsured Americans. We're working out the details of that. The President will make a final decision tomorrow. We expect an announcement, but the President's made it very clear. We don't want any American to worry about the cost of getting a test or the cost of getting treatment. And we've expanded coverage through Medicaid. We've expanded coverage through Medicare. Health insurance companies around the country, including Blue Cross, just today announced that all of their members will be waiving all co-payments on coronavirus treatment. Before those some 30-odd million uninsured Americans, the President has directed the Coronavirus Task Force to find a way to make sure that they know we will find a way to pay for your coronavirus treatment, and the President will be addressing that and announcing that tomorrow.
Mr. President, a point of clarification and then a follow-up question. Yesterday you said that you spoke to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis before he issued his stay-at-home order. Did you advise him to issue that order?
No, but I talked to him about it. And he wants to do what's right for the people of Florida. He's been a great governor. You could see that just by his popularity, which is extraordinary. We're proud of him. He's done a fantastic job, and he made the decision. But we spoke before he made the decision, yes.
And he had also said that he is considering putting people who are suspected of having coronavirus or who have tested positive for it in isolation centers, and that he could potentially
That I
use
haven't
hotels.
heard. No, that I haven't.
So he hasn't consulted with
I
you.
haven't heard that. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ebony Bowden from the New York Post. A few hours ago, Mayor de Blasio, the mayor of New York, said that New Yorkers leaving their homes should wear masks. They should also wear masks when they're with other people. Are you considering that kind of recommendation on a federal level? And if you are, how would you prevent a rush on N95 masks?
Well, I think they're going to be coming out with regulations on that, and if people want to abide by them, frankly, I don't think they'll be mandatory, because some people don't want to do that. But if people wanted, as an example on the masks, if people wanted to wear them, they can. If people wanted to use scarves, which they have, many people have them, they can. In many cases, the scarf is better. It's thicker. I mean, you can, depending on the material, it's thicker. But they can do that if they want. Now, a recommendation's coming out. We'll see what that recommendation is.
Any recommendations, sir?
But I will say this, they can pretty much decide for themselves right now.
Nationwide, and can I also just
Nationwide.
ask, nationwide, not just for hotspots, and then maybe this is best for Dr. Birx, but we've heard some differing guidance here. The WHO, even the Surgeon General have talked about various studies that show that masks, in addition to maybe not even being helpful to protecting people, may actually increase the rates of illness because people touch the masks than they touch themselves.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about just the
All right,
evolution of
maybe
the
I will
thinking on
ask
this?
Dr. Birx. And you might mention that other point also.
Yeah.
No, thank you. So I hope you got from the conference today that we're triangulating data that we know from the case numbers, the testing numbers, the supply chain numbers to create an integrated picture so that we can really support hospitals in their needs. And I think that level of granularity is really critical. Secondly, I just want to make the point that we really applaud the governors that are looking at a whole of state or a whole of metro approach. And what do I mean by that? The United States, going into this, had about 160,000 ventilators across the United States and another 60 to 70,000 anesthesia machines. That's about 5 times what most of the European countries have. But it's a matter of distribution to need, and I really applaud the governors that are bringing together their public hospitals with their more private hospitals and their visibility across their state. Because what we tried to talk about yesterday is every state, every county is different, and that's why we're looking at it at that level of granularity. And as we move through this epidemic, the needs need to be very tailored to those counties and, frankly, those hospitals. I mean, there's a reason why the president and Mr. Kushner have been very much involved in finding out what the public hospitals need. Why is that? Because the public hospitals sometimes have the weakest supply chain because they're often sometimes not as attractive to private sector distributors, or they may be too busy caring for the needs of patients to be really on top of their order forms and their supply chains. So really listening to the community that's at the front of this fight and getting feedback from those specific communities, no matter where they are, and listening to the frontline healthcare workers, because it's their reality that is important to all of us, whether you're the mayor or the governor or the federal government. And if they're saying they need something, we have to work together to supply that. And so that's what you're seeing with this triangulation. Every county will move through this differently, and that allows us to move around these vital issues that protect the frontline healthcare workers and protect the patients through the ventilators to make sure that the supply chain is aligned with the need as it happens. Now, you have to have very good data in order to be willing to work in that level of granularity, and that's what we've been working on to really develop that level of granularity to ensure that. So I just wanted to say one other thing about testing, just to give you the bottom line data of what we're seeing. We appreciate the groups who are reporting. Not everyone is reporting yet. And this is part of us trying to understand at a very granular level. We do have 2 states that do have 35% positives, and that's New York and New Jersey. So that confirms very clearly that that's a very clear and important hot zone. Louisiana, though, has 26% of their tests are positive. Michigan, Connecticut, Indiana, Georgia, Illinois, so that should tell you where the next hotspots are coming, are at 15% test positive, and then Colorado, DC, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts are at 13%. There's a significant number of states still under 10%, every one that I didn't discuss. California and Washington remain steady at an 8% rate. So what we're seeing finally is testing improving, more testing being done, still a high level of negatives in states without hotspots, allowing them to do more of this surveillance and containment. And then prioritizing this new rapid test kit to those areas that may not have the same amount of access to the Indian health services and to the public health institutions and the public health and state labs, so that they can use that and start forward leaning into surveillance. Now, we know that our people waiting for tests, and they're waiting for tests because when these areas became when they got onto the logarithmic curve, we prioritized people whose decisions, where the test decision would make it critical for their care. And so we prioritized hospitals, and we prioritized nurses and doctors and frontline workers. So that means if you went through a drive-through or you went through your doctor, you could have that delay. So the masks. So what I tried to give you is how we're using data in a very granular way. And so there's experiential data when you look at communities that have oftentimes utilized masks in general for personal protection for when they particularly are themselves sick and have used their mask in public. And we've looked at the rate of this COVID-19 in those populations. And then we're looking at the scientific evidence to bring those 2 pieces together. Let me just say one thing, though. The most important thing is the social distancing and washing your hands. And we don't want people to get an artificial sense of protection because they're behind a mask. Because if they're touching things, remember, your eyes are not in the mask. So if you're touching things and then touching your eyes, you're exposing yourself in the same way. So we don't want people to feel like, oh, I'm wearing a mask, I'm protected and I'm protecting others. You may be protecting others, but don't get a false sense of security that that mask is protecting you exclusively from getting infected, because there are other ways that you can get infected because of the number of asymptomatic and mild cases that are out there. And so this worries us, and that's why the debate is continuing about the mask, because we don't want, when we're trying to send a signal that every single person in this country needs to stay 6 feet away from everybody, that needs to be washing their hands constantly and know where their hands are, to send a signal that we think a mask is equivalent to those pieces. So when the advisory comes out, it will be an additive piece if it comes out, rather than saying this is a substitute for. And we want to make sure everybody understands it is not a substitute for the presidential guidelines that have already gone out, and to be absolutely clear about that.
Quick question about the test, Dr. Burks.
Dr. Burks,
a quick-
there's a lot of evidence we're seeing that experts are saying that a high number of these tests could be producing false negatives. So
Of the Roche and Abbott tests?
that as many as 1 in 3 tests might be providing false negatives. I was wondering maybe you could explain.
That would
talk a little
almost
bit about
be
the science.
impossible with having 35% positives. If that was true, you would have
Sorry about the
100%
underlying
positive
data
or
here.
66% positive. So what I can tell you is the number of positive tests is tracking very closely with the number of cases diagnosed. So I will look into that. I look at the Roche and Abbott numbers every night. They're trending exactly in the same way. And that's important when you're validating data, to really validate, does this same site, in other words, I'm looking between testing sites to see, are there consistencies? Is there an anomaly? To make sure for what you just very specifically asked. So I will go back and look at it more carefully. I haven't seen that kind of anomaly. This same platform is being used across the country, and that's a range from what I reported, 3% positivity up to 35% positivity. And that range reflects also what we're seeing with the hot spots and the number of cases. And frankly, I mean, we hate to talk about it, but it also tracks with the hospitalizations independent of diagnosis and the mortality that we're seeing. So all of those pieces validate
Concerned
together.
that people might be getting a false sense of security, or that we might not be seeing all of the data here on who has it.
Well, I'm telling you, I'm still missing 50% of the data from reporting. I have 660 tests reported in. We've done 1.3 million. So there is, and it could be those sites. So we do need to see the bill said you need to report. We're still not receiving 100% of the tests.
Dr. Burks, with regard to the test, the president's sample collection took 1 minute, results were reported back in 15 minutes. I realize you're the president of the United States, but when will everyone get to take a test that works that quickly and you get results that quickly?
So these are new tests, and we have prioritized the groups that we think have the least access to testing now. And who do we mean by that? We mean the Indian Health Service. They're often in remote areas, rural areas, the governors of the northwestern states that may not have the advantage of these high throughput machines that are often across the East Coast and in high metro areas, Colorado, and then across the West Coast. So we've prioritized the presidential 15-minute test to the Indian Health Services and public health labs so that they can support nursing home testing and other areas where we think surveillance is absolutely key. So at this moment, they're prioritized in that way. Yes, 1,200 of them are going out in that way.
More of those tests need to be made in order for
They
more
are
people.
being made.
Yeah.
Okay, so in a matter of,
They're moving very quickly.
So I'm glad you asked that, because today, there's 18,000 of these machines already out there. We're trying to find out exactly where everyone is, because you can see that gives you amazing flexibility. Because if people would allow it to be loaned to a state that's in a hot spot or a state where you want to do additional surveillance, 18,000 tests, 18,000 machines is a huge amount. And it really gets to your very question about how we can prioritize what we have at the same time we're moving out what is new. And so really figuring out who should those go to, who can we ask communities, because these will be in the community, to share those machines into the community who need the testing now. And I think that's really an incredible question that really needs to be answered over the next 24 hours.
Dr. Burks, a point of clarity about the face covering guidance. You said it's still a point of debate. You said to use the phrase "the guidance" if it comes out. Is the guidance coming out, and when?
Yes.
And when, sir?
In the days ahead, we're currently working through the task force, taking the consultation advice, CDC, our top health experts, and we'll be bringing forward the guidance from the CDC in the next several days.
Just remember, it's not a substitute for everything that we're asking people to do. And just to everybody out there across the country, when we say no gatherings of 10, we're looking at, we wanted to be clear, if you have a family of 10, we don't want you to be split up. But we don't expect people to be having dinner parties, cocktail parties. I mean, I know you've seen the slope in the United States versus the slope in Italy. And we have to change that slope. We have to change the logarithmic curve that we're on. We see country after country having done that. What it means in the United States is not everyone is doing it. So we're only as strong as every community, every county, every state, every American following the guidelines to a T. And I can tell by the curve, and as it is today, that not every American is following it. And so this is really a call to action. We see Spain, we see Italy, we see France, we see Germany. When we see others beginning to bend their curves, we can bend ours, but it means everybody has to take that same responsibility as Americans.
Mr. President, Mr. President, can I have a quick follow-up on oil, please? In your conversations with Russia and Saudi Arabia, did you have to make any concessions to get them to agree to cut their production?
No.
Like, did you agree to cut U.S. production of oil?
No, we didn't discuss that. They want to do that. It's good for their countries, and we did not discuss that, no.
Mr. President, NBC News has learned that the Navy is set to fire the captain of the USS Theodore Roosevelt after he raised red flags about the COVID-19 outbreak on his ship. It appears as if he's being punished for trying to save the lives of the sailors in his command.
No, I don't
What's
think
your
so at
assessment?
all, but we're going to wait a little while because I understand there's a news conference by the Secretary of Defense about that. But no, I don't agree with that at all. Not at all, not even a little bit. Yeah?
Thank you. This morning you said once again that New York got off to a late start and they should have pushed harder. But governors and other state leaders say they rely on the federal government to assess the situation and how risky it is. And they want to know, how would they have known to start sooner without your guidance?
Well, they have experts, and frankly, long after we came out and talked about it, look, how would I have known to cut off China? I cut off China very early. And if I didn't, we would have a chart that you wouldn't believe. So how would I know to do that? How would I know to cut off Europe? I cut off Europe very early. I mean, you have to make a decision. People knew that some bad things were going on, and they got off to a late start. And some others got off to a late start also. But we cut off China. If we didn't cut off China, we would have been in some big trouble. And we cut it off. And you know what? We cut it off way early. Go ahead.
Mr. President, to follow up on the insurance point in a separate question that came in from a colleague who can't be in the room. On the insurance point, is there going
Who are you with?
roll call? Is there going to be an opportunity for insurance companies, if in fact hospitals are compensated for uncompensated care,
right.
Are the insurance companies going to also get compensated for extraordinary expenses that they may have, or are they assuming that cost?
So we haven't discussed it, but we're talking to them, Getting them not to pay copays in the case of the big ones was a tremendous thing. That's a lot of money they gave up. But we're discussing that with the insurance companies. We'll let you know. It'll be pretty quickly. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question on Japan, sir. They are expanding their entry ban to include the United States. Are you planning to take any similar action to ban Japanese nationals from coming to the U.S. as a result of this crisis?
Well, we're looking at a lot of things and a lot of different bans. We have more bans than anybody. We had bans when bans weren't fashionable, if you remember, right at the beginning of this administration. It was for different reasons. But we've had bans long before people thought of bans. When I did China, it had never been done before. I was the first one to do it. Remember that. It had never, according to what I read in all the papers, this had never been done. This is a terrible thing to do. And 4 weeks later, they were all saying, we're lucky we did it. So we're looking at it. No, we heard that. And I think it's fine that they do that. They're trying to protect their country, and we have to protect our country. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, I asked you yesterday about stay-at-home orders and if that, decision should be left in the hands of governors, or if you're considering telling the entire nation stay at home.
Yeah.
So just today, Georgia's governor finally issued a stay-at-home order saying that individuals could have been infecting people before they ever felt bad, but we didn't know that until the last 24 hours. Is that ignorance, gross incompetence?
He's a good governor, Brian Kemp. He's
You've
a
been
very
having
good.
calls with these
He's
governors.
a good governor, and he has to make his own decision on that. I let the states. I think we're about 85% positive on that. If you look, I think it's about 85% of the states have got to stay at home. Brian's a great governor. It's his decision. He made that decision. Ultimately, he decided to go along with it, and they're doing well, and the state's doing well in many respects. Yeah, go ahead, please.
This is another question from a colleague who couldn't make it in today, from Emily Gooden at the Daily Mail. I had a question in regards to the Russian plane that landed at JFK with medical supplies. Did the United States ask Russia for this aid, or is it just accepting it?
We're accepting it. It was a very nice offer from President Putin. I spoke to him the other night, as I told you, and they had excess medical equipment, things, and I'll take it. I think it's very nice. We've had some from China. We also help other countries. We like doing that. Like I said before, if we have excess stuff, we let it go out. We let some go out where, frankly, they had orders for it, and I didn't want to stop orders. It was a very nice gesture on behalf of President Putin, and I could have said no thank you, or I could have said thank you. And it was a large plane of very high-quality medical supplies, and I said, I'll take it.
Is he offering any further aid in your conversation?
I think he would if we asked for it, but he was very nice. It was part of the call. He said, we have it. It's additional. They have very big difficulties with this virus also, as you know, Russia. I thought it was a very nice gesture on behalf of President Putin. I could have said, no, I don't want it, or I could have said, I'll take it. And you know what I said? I'll take it.
Accept further aid?
I think so, yeah. If they send things that we need, I'd take it. Sure.
Concerns about Russian
Nice gesture.
propaganda?
No, I'm not concerned about Russian propaganda, not even a little bit. He offered a lot of medical, high-quality stuff that I accepted, and that may save a lot of lives. I'll take it every day. Please, in the back.
You said that in January you tweeted that you stand with the people of Iran since the beginning of your presidency, and you'll continue to stand with the people of Iran, given the fact they're so hard hit with coronavirus.
Oh, they're very hard hit.
But
They're
would
very
you
hard
consider
hit. In a lot of
using-
ways, they're hard hit. They're hit with their economy, with their military, and with, obviously, the virus. They're very hard hit.
Would you consider easing sanctions to allow medical supplies to get in?
Well, they haven't even asked us to do that.
But we know that sanctions hit the people, not the government.
You know what? They haven't even asked us to do that. If they want to meet, would love to meet and would love to settle the whole thing out, but I doubt they'll be.
So realistically, how does a person in Tehran pick up the phone and call you?
I think they love America. I think the Iranians love America. I think they'd love to be free. I think they'd love to have just some of the things that we have. You know, I remember Iran many years ago. Friends of mine were always in Iran. They were doing real estate deals in Iran. They were building beautiful buildings all over Iran, apartment houses. They were very successful. And then one day that came to an end. But you know what? The people of Iran, they remember that. It was a long time ago, but not so long ago. And they remember it. And I'll tell you, they love America. They love what we stand for. And we're not looking for change. We're not looking for government takeover, government change. You know, this country's been through that many times. That doesn't work.
People, would you encourage other countries who are maybe concerned about
No, but what I
running
did,
afoul
what I
of
did is, I
sanctions
put it out very publicly with respect to Iran. I said if they need help with respect to the virus, we'd love to send. We have the greatest medical professionals in the world. We'd love
What
to send
countries
them
are you
over.
encouraging, perhaps, to lend their support? Because there are many countries that
I'm
feel...
not encouraging or discouraging. They've been a very hostile country. They made a deal that President Obama should have never made. It was a short-term deal, giving them $150 billion, giving them $1.8 billion in cash. Green,
Your
fill up this room 5
administration,
times.
do you have a moral responsibility?
No, nobody's even asking about it. I have a moral responsibility to help them if they ask. If they needed help, I would certainly consider
The
different
United
things.
Nations says they need help.
Well, that's up to the United Nations. I'm talking about us. And what happens is if they wanted help, because they have a very big case of virus, a very, very big case, one of the worst on earth, if you believe what you're reading, and I happen to believe what I see and what I know. And if they wanted help, we'd give them help. Yeah, you had one in the back, please?
Mr. President, and a question for Jared too. You talk about a granular approach to receiving data from these different states and regions to try and figure out what they need. The President, you just enacted the DPA on ventilators and masks. Are there any signals from across the country that might indicate there are other things besides masks and ventilators that are slowly kind of rising in terms of need, like hand sanitizer, for instance?
Sure. So the first issue that we've been dealing with was really the ventilators. That was the number 1, number 2, and number 3 from all the states. What we've been finding is that people have a lot of these requests based on the models, and what we've been trying to do over at FEMA is say to the states, well, if you would like ventilators, we need to see, first look in your states, right? So for example, in northern Jersey, they're going down to southern Jersey and they're finding ventilators and trying to relocate them to where they have their hotspots. The second thing that we've done is we've asked them to survey for alternative ventilators. Dr. Berg spoke before about the anesthesia machines and the ability to convert them to be ventilators. So we're asking people to be resourceful inside their states before they come to the federal government. The third thing we've been asking states to do is to provide what their daily utilization rates are. So everyone's asking for everything. One congressman got a call from his local hospital saying, I need 250 ventilators. And he said, well, you don't have a COVID patient within 4 counties. Why do you want 250 ventilators? And he says, well, we just want to be safe. We're very nervous right now. So what you have all over the country is a lot of people are asking for things that they don't necessarily need at the moment. And the job of FEMA and Admiral Plovchek has been to try to make sure that we're getting the real data from the cities, from the states, that we can make real-time allocation decisions based on the data. And right now what's happening is a lot of the different cities and states are providing FEMA that information. We're talking to them daily. They're updating that information daily, and that's enabling the federal government to make much more informed decisions on where they position ventilators. You also have a situation where in some states, FEMA allocated ventilators to the states, and you have instances where in cities they're running out, but the state still has a stockpile. And the notion of the federal stockpile was it's supposed to be our stockpile. It's not supposed to be state stockpiles that they then use. So we're encouraging the states to make sure that they're assessing the needs, they're getting the data from their local situations, and then trying to fill it with the supplies that we've given them. The same thing with the mask. So the N95 mask is actually an item that wasn't used as frequently in the medical profession before this. It was used mostly for diseases. So speaking to a lot of the doctors and hospital administrators, they would say they used actually a very low percentage of the N95 masks. What the president and the vice president were able to do with Congress was to get the waiver so that you could expand the pool, because a lot of the masks were used for the construction industry. So now there's a much bigger pool of masks in the country. There was a stockpile. They distributed that based on where they anticipated a lot of the need would go, but a lot of that still is stuck with the states, and it hasn't trickled down to the right places within the state. So I would just encourage you, when you have governors saying that the federal government hasn't given them what they need, I would just urge you to ask them, well, have you looked within your state to make sure that you haven't been able to find the resources? Unlike other countries, a lot of the medical system in America is a private. It's not a public government controlled. So you have to get the data from what's in their state, look at it in that way, and then make sure that they're being resourceful in a way to do that. And also ask them what their utilization percentage is, because if one governor is asking for more ventilators, and if the federal government sends them more than they need, the goal here is not to have ventilators sitting in a warehouse where you have another state where you have people who need them. So what we're trying to do is make informed, data-driven decisions both on ventilators, masks, any other supply we can get to make sure it's going to the people who need them.
Jared, what triggered?
I wonder if you could weigh in on the reports of which I'm sure you're aware, where unnamed White House officials have described your role as being something of running a shadow task force. How do you describe your role? How do you describe the qualifications you bring to your role?
Yeah, I would just say very simply, look, the president asked the vice president to run the task force. The vice president asked me to assist. I've been serving really at the direction of the vice president. He's asked me to get involved in different projects. The vice president and I speak probably sometimes 5-10 times a day, but everything that I'm doing is at the direction of the vice president. If some people are talking to you, that means they're probably not informed as to what's going on, but I can assure you that I'm speaking with Dr. Birx, Dr. Fauci, the vice president, and the president multiple times a day to make sure that I'm accomplishing and focusing on the objectives that the vice president deems a priority.
Jared, to follow up on the
Or
ventilators
they
and
don't
the national
exist. Or these
stockpile.
sources don't exist. They're fake sources. Okay? A lot of fake sources out there, they don't exist. I read about it for a long time. I've been reading a lot of them. Fake sources, they don't exist. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Jared, what triggers sending a ventilator from the national stockpile to a state? In other words, how sick does somebody have to be to get one of these national ventilators?
Well, that's not the issue that's not the criteria. You have the states basically putting in their requests, and they're giving us their utilization percentages. So it's a very simple formula. The states should know how many ventilators they have in their states. And by the way, some governors you speak to are senators, and they don't know what's in their state. You know, some governors I'll speak to, and they'll know to the number how many ventilators they have in their state, because that's the first thing a good manager will do. What a lot of the voters are seeing now is that when you elect somebody to be a mayor or a governor or a president, you're trying to think about who will be a competent manager during the time of crisis. This is a time of crisis, and you're seeing certain people are better managers than others. So what I would say is that the way that the federal government's trying to allocate it is they're trying to make sure, A, you have your data, right? Don't ask us for things when you know that, when you don't know what you have in your own state. Just because you're scared, you ask your medical professionals, and they don't know. You have to take inventory of what you have in your own state, and then you have to be able to show that there's a real need. And so we pre-positioned a lot of things because most governors off the bat didn't know what they needed. But FEMA has a joint command with Admiral Polovchek, Admiral Giroir, and Pete Gaynor, where every couple hours when their requests come in, they evaluate the request, they all vote on the requests, and then if there's something that they want to elevate to the task force, they bring it to the vice president to make a recommendation.
Chair, if I may, you might ask Deborah we're literally tracking hospitalization cases on a daily basis, interacting with governors and health systems, and that informs our supply chain decisions.
Yeah, I want to thank the health commissioners and all of them that have been sending hospital data in. I think it's really critical and important to all of us. New York City has been providing information, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and certainly Louisiana in these hotspots. And that allows us, we can see where they are with the rising number of cases, where they are in their curve, what can be predicted, and really ensuring that people get what they need as they need it. And so I think many of the governors now and the health commissioners have been, I had to use 20, I'm intubating 20 people a day now. I have enough for the next 3 days. If that doubles, we're seeing our hospitalization rates stabilizing, but we still think there will be this many more in the next days. That's the information that they then translate into providing the ventilators. So when you see the ventilator numbers going out, they're going out in 150s and 200s, because I think early on we sent a big bolus out, and then not all of them, even today, have been fully utilized. And so we want to make sure every state and every hotspot can be reassured that ventilators are there for them as they move through the curve. And I think to date, we've been able to do that. And I think that's what's important to me, is that people have what they need when they need it. And to date, people who have needed ventilators have been able to get on ventilators. And I think that's our goal with governors and with the mayors to make sure that that continues to happen. But that means all of us have to work together. And I think that's what's been really important over the last few weeks, is people are not making generic requests anymore. They're making data-driven requests because they know precisely what's happening in their hospitals.
Dr. Burks, when you were up here a little bit ago, you talked about the curve and what you're seeing, and you're concerned that people are not abiding by the social distancing guidelines. And you seemed in your voice to be quite concerned about that. Has the curve changed enough at this point where that 100,000 to 240,000 people likely to die, has that shifted upwards at all?
No, it's just when I look at so we're in week 2.2 in our guidelines. And I guess what I expected when the president put out guidelines that said, don't go to bars, don't be in groups more than 10 people. When we said that now over 16 days ago, that was serious. And then you could see what happened subsequently. And you can see the number of individuals who have been infected since then. Because the people we're seeing infected today and in hospitals today were infected after the guidelines went out. So that's what we're worried about. And we're worried about that we're still in this, and that's why the president extended it for 30 days. But we have to get out of this. We have to start seeing this.
But Deborah, aren't you referring to just a few states? Because many of those states are dead flat.
Yes.
I mean, so
Yes,
it's
there
hard
are
to get-
states
it's hard
that
to
are
be-
dead
yeah.
flat, but what changes the curve is a new Detroit, a new Chicago, a new New Orleans, a new Colorado. Those change the curves because it all of a sudden spikes with the number of new cases, because you have a certain projection of new cases and then a whole nother city comes on top where they're in their logarithmic phase. So those ones that I talked about that had test results greater than 13% positive, all of those states or all of those counties are in logarithmic phase. That means there are a lot of counties that aren't, and we're excited about those counties that have been testing and still finding quite flat. And hopefully maybe Sunday or so or sometime this weekend we can go through all the states and the curves again, so you can see where the California and Washington are still steady. But we're watching very carefully because we see that you can go from this to this very quickly. And this should not be happening any longer in new places if people are doing the social distancing, washing their hands, not getting together in large groups more than 10.
Dr. Burks. But again, so I look at the graphs all the time.
Yes.
And you have many
Yes.
flatliners. I call them flatliners. I'm amazed at them. And you have a couple that are up. It's hard to blame the flatliners for not doing a good job.
No, I don't want to say that. No, don't. No. Thank you, sir. I don't want, in fact, I want to praise the states and I think I want to be able to call them out and show you their graphs so you can see they've had steady small cases. They're testing and they're doing a lot of testing, and their percent of test positives are under 5%. I mean, we have a whole group of states who are testing and their positivity rate is under 5%. We know what it looks like on the logarithmic curve. You're in the 13%, then 15%, then 26%, and then 35%. That's what we're trying to prevent. And it's the metro areas that are absolutely crucial in this. And so if you're in a metro area or you're in a small city, please make sure all of your friends and family are following the guidelines. That's the best thing we can do.
Because I saw those pens going 5 minutes ago. They were they were thrilled. And the fact is, yes, we compare them to Italy, one place. But we have many places that are really doing great. And I think that's what Deborah meant. She didn't mean all of them. So when you write your story tomorrow, maybe you'll write it correctly. She was talking about one state, and another state is having a hard time. And they're closely associated. And by the way, the people are doing a very good job, including the people that live there. But when Deborah was talking about Italy, she was talking about the one, and then the other was lower. And then you have mostly states that have been unbelievable. So she wasn't talking about the average of everything. She was talking about an individual state, which is, I think, still better than Italy. Italy's having a hard time. By the way, Spain is having a hard time. France is having a hard time. But our states, generally speaking, it's like lots of different countries all over. We have many of those countries are doing a phenomenal job. They're really flat. And I think that's what you meant. I don't know. I don't want to speak for, but I thought that's what I understood she meant. Yeah, please.
Question about that though, because coronavirus is present in all 50 states. You said before that when you implored mayors and governors to be serious about this, you said once it shows up, mitigation efforts are too late. So how do you then square that with this notion that some states are doing well? I mean, the virus doesn't abide by
some
state
states
laws.
they stay in better. They're not touching. They're not whatever it is. They're not going out. They're not in groups. And some states are not probably as good, or for whatever reason, or they also live a lot closer. You know, New York is very dense. And, you know, California's pretty dense too, and they've got a very good record going so far. We hope it doesn't spike up, but it's very flat. We have states that are doing incredibly well. I mean, when I looked at some of them, I looked at some states that I would have thought maybe wouldn't have done as well, and they're really flatlined. Hope they stay that way. I hope they stay that way. Say it, Jim.
Isn't that the point, that you want those states to stay flatlined?
I want them. Yeah,
I mean,
that's what I'm
seems like
saying.
you're-
No. But when Deborah mentioned about Italy and our country, she wasn't referring to our country. She was referring to one state.
She's encouraging people to do a better job of following these social distancing measures. That's what I'm understanding.
Okay, so my understanding, I'm going to let her say it, but I think that everybody would have to be thrilled with the way most states are doing. Thrilled. The flatline states that have almost no bump. I mean, I would think. Now, then you have others where, for whatever reason, they're higher. That's different. But you can't condemn people living in a flatliner with people living in something where there's the big bump or the bigger bump, or more akin to Italy, where they have some very unique problems. In all fairness to Italy, they have some very unique problems. But if you'd like to come up and...
So how many flatline do we have, and
A lot
how
of
many
them.
do we have? How many? How many do we have?
So why don't I bring you the whole deck again, and we'll divide out the states so you can see them, because you really have to see each state separately. That's why I started with, there are states where you've heard me talk about how concerned I was. These are states that before the guidelines went out or right after the guidelines went out. I mean, you can look at it, it's on the website if you go to the healthdata.org, about when governors made clarity about closing their states as far as the social distancing, the washing of the hands, the bars, the doing takeout. And you can line that up with the presidential guidelines. And not all states, when the presidential guidelines came out, immediately followed the presidential guidelines. Not all states did. There are states that also may have gotten many more seeds from outside communities. That certainly is one of the issues that New York and New Jersey, Connecticut, and Rhode Island are facing. The virus came in from multiple places into those states. It was undetected early on, and they have a very logarithmic curve. What I'm saying is even one of those curves in one county, in one city, is one curve too many. So I am passionate about everyone following the guidelines because of the outlier curves. Maybe that was a better way of putting it.
That's
The outlier curves
that's perfect.
in specific counties is to make sure that doesn't happen anywhere else.
So would you feel better if every state did a stay-at-home order? Would you
I
feel
think
better?
most of the states have done that. I think one death from this is one death too many. I mean, I come out of epidemics and pandemics. We know what to do. I know we don't have a vaccine, and I know we don't have a therapeutic, but we know what can be done, and others are doing it, and most of the people in the United States are doing it. It's our communities, it's every American that has to make these changes, and I know they're really hard. And I know it's hard to remember. I mean, I have to say to myself every day, because I'm around very important people, to like never touch anything. And I'm just like paranoid now about touching things. I'm sure you all are too. I mean, we've gotten to the place where we don't go to your places on Pebble Beach. We go to the one that's open aired because, I mean, you're trying to protect your reporters. I mean, I understand that. We're all trying to protect each other, and we all have to adapt to this new reality that we're in right now. And I believe everybody is trying really hard, and I'm just asking them to try really, really hard for these next 28 days because they will make a tremendous difference. We see that evidence. And so it's like having a vaccine or a therapeutic because we know what works, and we're asking everybody to apply what works. And I know it takes amazing attention to detail because, you know, the minute you forget or do something, you're like, oh my gosh, I should have never done that. And that's the level of attention it takes.
Covering our faces could help us do
So
that.
I just want to
and
say,
the
look,
guidelines are coming
many
out.
states have started low and slow, and then they stayed at a good level. Some really stayed at a great level. Some, Louisiana is an example, it was low and slow, and they were looking great. I was watching it because, you know, it's a kind of a place people go to with Mardi Gras, which sort of is an interesting point. Because after Mardi Gras, it was low, and then all of a sudden it went up very rapidly, and now it's one of our true hotspots, right? Certain areas of Michigan, Detroit, looked like it was doing pretty good, and then all of a sudden it went up. So you have that too. But I'll tell you what, we have states that have been really incredible in the fact that they have kept so low. They have not. You haven't seen the bump, and I hope you don't. I hope you don't. And you have a couple that for a lot of different reasons, and that's not to blame anybody, but they are at a higher level. But very few. I think, Deborah, I mean, I may say, I think most people have actually followed the presidential, you can call them whatever you want. I would never use the word dictates, because if I used that word, I would be in such trouble. In fact, you'll put me in trouble just that I even mentioned the thought of it, okay? But we make a recommendation, and I think they've done a good job. Maybe they started a little later, but maybe they're also more difficult states. But we've done, I think, on average, really phenomenally. As a country, I think we've done phenomenally. Because when you looked at that graph the other day, I don't know if you saw it, I assume you saw it, everybody in the world saw it, but you look at all those lines on the bottom, one color after another, all different, representing different states. It's all crowded at the bottom. And then you had two that were up, but you had, I don't know, almost every one of them was down low, very low. So there were a lot of people listening. And I just did want to clear, because I don't need headlines tomorrow, neither does the country. Because I don't want this country working so hard and then have press that is, in this case, maybe misinterpret something. Because I might have, when I heard it, I was surprised at first too, but I understood what Deborah meant. But I think it's very important, because I think it's very important for you to be accurate. One other thing, just a quick thing. So what I found is when governors call me, I mean, I think in every case they've always been so nice, so nice. And I've seen them and heard them say, thank you very much. You have done a great job, a fantastic job in one case. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Then I'll see the governor, usually of the opposite party, in almost all cases, except maybe one. But in almost all cases, they're very generous, they're very nice, they thank me, everything's great, we're doing a great job. And then I'll see them on television, and it's like a different person. And I realize there are some people, because of politics, that if they say, we want 1,000 ventilators, and I'll say, no, Jim, I want to give you 5,000 ventilators. They'll say, thank you, you are the greatest president that's ever lived. And then I'll see them quoted in a paper or see them on a show, and they'll say, the president didn't come through for me. I'm very disappointed in the president. And we have a lot of that. They're very happy when they talk to me, then I see them. But there are some people, if they asked for 500 of something, and if I gave them 5,000, they will say, you'll say, how's the president doing? Well, we don't like the job. To my face, they're very nice. But then sometimes, I guess they assume I don't watch them or something, but I watch very closely. Yeah, please.
Mr. President, one especially vulnerable population is the prison population, and that's especially with Jared here. I wondered if you could address what the federal government is doing to protect
Well, it's
inmates.
vulnerable and that it's close together, really. I can't tell you about age, but a lot of young people in prison. Some states, I have not done that at all, but some states are letting people out of prison. Some people are getting out that are very serious criminals in some states, and I don't like that. I don't like it. But it's a city or state thing in certain cases, as you know. I think maybe Philadelphia comes to mind. So we'll see. Have to see what's going on, and we don't like it. The people don't like it, and we're looking in to see if I have the right to stop it in some cases. Okay.
Mr. President, 6.6 million Americans filed for unemployment last week. We haven't heard you talk a lot today about what they're going through. So,
I think
what's your message to them?
I think it's terrible. So look, 4 weeks ago, we had the greatest economy in the history of the world, the greatest in the world, greatest in the history of the world. We had the most jobs ever in the history of the United States, almost 160 million jobs, right? And then one day, I get a call from Deborah, who's fantastic, and from Dr. Fauci, and she said, we have a problem. I said, what's the problem? And they said, we may have to close it up. I said, close what up? They said, close up the country. I said, what's that all about? And we discussed today, and probably not since 1917, we came to that conclusion, and she is a fantastic person, a brilliant person, and this is what she knows. I said, has it ever been this bad? And I think I can represent that you said no, and part of it is a contagion. It's so contagious. It's like, if you sneeze, I probably get it. Who ever heard of a thing like that, okay? And this very talented reporter is bailing out, okay? He's out of here. I don't blame you. But it's a very contagious thing, and probably the likes of which we've never seen in terms of that. But 1917, so that's over 100 years ago, but that was, it's been written about many, many times. That was a horrible, whether it was 75 or 100 million people, I've heard from 50 to 75, I've heard 75 to 100, but it was tens of millions of people. Now, we have the advantage of communication. This could have been just as bad. I mean, here we can read on the internet, we can see what to do, we can have these meetings, they can watch on television, which they do. A lot of people are watching. A lot of people are watching. And they say, gee, social distancing. But in 1917, they didn't have that option. They didn't know what to do. They just noticed people were dying all over the place. Think of it, 75 to 100 million people died. A lot of people in this country died. To me, it's a great question. How come more people didn't die in this country? And they say it actually started in this country and went to Europe. We lost a lot of people, but relatively we lost very few compared to Europe. So this is a terrible thing that happened. And what's happening now with people and jobs, so think of the position I'm in. We have built all together, everybody, not me, everybody, the greatest economy in history. And all of a sudden, people come in that we respect or we know. And here's the thing, they were right. Everybody questioned it for a while. Not everybody, but a good portion questioned it. They said, let's keep it open, let's ride it. If we did that, you saw the other graph. And whether it's true or almost true or maybe not true enough, the number was 2.2 million people would have died. 2.2 million people would have died in a short period of time. In fact, the graph could have been even shorter. I always notice that horrible one where it goes high, it actually comes down a little bit faster. It might have been over faster, and you would have lost 2.2 million people. So they come in and they say, we have to close up the country. And I say, you know what that does to the fabric of this country? To people that had great jobs, great family, no problems with money, their 401k, everything is perfect. Then all of a sudden they go from that to having no job in one day. They never even thought of it. And then you see 6 million people unemployed, unemployment numbers get released, and you see 6 million people. And it's an artificial closing. It's not like we have a massive recession or worse. It's artificial because we turned it off. Think of what we're doing. We're saying, don't go to work and we'll pay you. Everything's the opposite. It was always go to work and make a lot of money and do well, and the American dream. Because of a hidden enemy, we're saying, don't go to work, and we're going to pay you. Look at the money, $2 trillion, and we will probably do more. I think infrastructure would be a fantastic thing to do. You want to get the restaurants back, you give deductibility. You understand what that is? You give deductibility for businesses where they go and they use the restaurants. The restaurants will be bigger and better than they were before. You know, people don't know, a lot of restaurants closed when they ended deductibility. And then they started doing well, but they had fewer restaurants. But the boom of the restaurants is when they had deductibility, where corporations could use them. So, and entertainment. That was a great thing. But they closed it, and then they closed it again, and it wasn't the same. But you want to get them back, you do that. But infrastructure, we borrow our money now at zero. You know, if we were paying 5%, 4%, 3%, it's a different ballgame. We're borrowing. We can borrow long-term for zero, literally zero. You know that, because we're considered the safe investment all over the world. They want money in the United States. That's where they want the money. So I know better than anybody. I know what they're going through, and it's horrible. But you know what I want to do? I want to be able to get them back fast. When this is over, it's going to be a day we're going to celebrate, because everyone's going to go to work, and I think we're going to have boom times. I think it's going to be great. And we've learned a lot. We've learned about borders. We've learned about reliance on other countries. We've learned so much that I think we really have a chance to be bigger and better and stronger. And I think it's going to come back very quickly. But first, we have to defeat this enemy. So we will see you tomorrow. Thank you very much. Thank you.
President, would you be somebody to be able to follow up on what you're looking into for that?